CRM was supposed to improve customer relationships. Instead, it's shorthand for Customer Rage Machine. Your CRM can't explain why a customer's package took 5 detours? Reboot your inner peace and scream into a pillow. It's okay. On the ServiceNow AI platform, CRM stands for something better. AI agents don't just track issues, they resolve them, transforming the entire customer experience. So breathe in and breathe out. Bad CRM was then. This is ServiceNow.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to How Are the podcast from Roker Report. And as this will be entering your ears on Thursday morning, we are now 5 days since our epic win over West Ham United. And we've gone over it all with James Hunter and then again with Ian Murder before we pivoted midweek to Sir David Bell from the University of Sunderland. So before we go into previewing our trip to Burnley properly, we thought we'd do a quick news roundup. So to help me today, we have our man from Down Under who makes sure we are covering Sunderland AFC 24 hours a day, which is, of course, Martin Wunless. Hello, Martin.
Hello, mate. Aye, 24/7, 365. Eh? You can't beat it.
That's it. I mean, we only did, 2 big previews of the West Ham win, and it still doesn't seem enough, to be honest.
No, but, again, I think, me, I always like to chalk one off, shut the door to that one. Let's look at the next one. So I'm dead keen to talk about Burnley. I know we're not going to talk too much about the Burnley game today, but I'm always one for looking forward, not backwards. So, yeah, nice to still remember the West Ham game, but, there's an awful lot more things that we need to do this season. So I think we can start looking forward towards those, can't we?
I know. I think me and you might have been the only 2 people in the whole world who wanted to start looking ahead to this Premier League season after that Wembley game.
Well, that's right. No, that's right. You and I were the ones after the playoffs going, right, let's stop talking about the playoffs now. It's December.
Yeah. I think it's going to be like 2045 and we'll still be talking about that, to be fair. But yes, and we all, of course, got someone else to join us. And of course, we couldn't go a few days without having the next fella on. He's managed to find a gap in his busy podcasting schedule for us. So we are delighted to have Jonny Hawley with us. Hello, Jonny.
All right, lads. It's always a pleasure to be joined by 2 such fine gentlemen as yourselves to be able to talk about this magnificent football club. And yes, I am killing you with kindness there.
Yeah, I didn't realise we had 5 people on. Just, hopefully they'll join us. And those other 2 fine gentlemen will join us in 5 minutes.
I only put this little bit of information together. Well, no, it's not information, it's connection. And everybody else who's listening, including you, Chris, probably has. But, on this week that we do with Kelvin and Andrew, we've been talking about Jhon Hawley recently. And I've just written a piece for the website, which will go out tomorrow, about a Sunderland versus Newcastle friendly in 1981. And Jhon Hawley was put in the transfer list and scored a goal in that game. And it was only when I was writing that, I was like, Jhon Hawley? Jonny Hawley?
Yeah, so...
like a Spider-Man meme.
Yeah, well, me dad had quite a substantial argument with me mum about trying to name us Kevin Philip Hawley when I was born. And he lost that one, so he slid Johnny in. He was like, well, she's not going to know who Jhon Hawley is. So I'll get him in one way or another.
I've got a mate out here who's a Welsh lad. He's a Cardiff fan. And his missus is German. And he managed to name his most recently born kid Ninian. And he triggered up this whole Welsh heritage, ancient Welsh folklore. And I think if you dig far enough back, there is that. But she only subsequently found out about Ninian Park. So,
well, I don't know if anyone's old enough talking about that kind of going back and looking in the lineage of names and things like that. But if you can remember, there was a barrow in the Bridges about 30 years ago that used to sell the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Names or something. And it used to be this, they used to ask you what your name was and they used to put it into this computer. And it was just a little barrow in the middle of the Bridges, but they used to give you this kind of framed thing. And it apparently told you about the history of your name and where it come from, the origins and all this. And it had this professional seal at the bottom and it was all framed and it looked all fancy. And then people were going mad for them, and they'd realised when people started going into each other's houses that they were all just replicated. But they had about 10 templates. But people were like reading each other's and going, "Oh God, your name's similar. Hang on, your lineage is exactly the same as mine." and in the end, I think it got shut down because people realised it was a little bit dodgy. But if I think it was dodgy anyways. But anyone can get in touch with us if they remember that borough, because I think for about a week until my brother worked at it. I think for about a week, and in the end, he nearly got hit. Because people were angry with what they were getting for their money, so he packed it in quite quickly. But anyway, yeah. I mean that Jonny Hawley, the footballer John Hawley. I'm sure he wasn't quite as famous. More people know our Jonny Hawley, I'm sure, than the old John Hawley. I mean, I sent you a message of the weekend. I bet it was like a hard day's night getting into the Stadium of Light at the weekend. People, all the girls screaming, "That's Jonny Hawley from all the podcasts."
Oh, well, it's just another average day for me, obviously. I just can't move for the crowds of admirers. Although I'll tell you, I think John Hawley scored more screamers against Arsenal than I have. I'll give him that one.
Yeah, the pain you have to go through for all these podcasts, Jonny. But well done for putting yourself through it. Anyway, let's get into the latest news on Sunderland AFC, and I think the big one, because we're all kind of hopeful it goes through, is the Jhon Lucumi one. And it's been going on it's been rumbling along the background, and he seems to have been one of the biggest links with Sunderland in terms of that central defence position, even going back beyond Alderete, I think. He's been linked for quite some time, and it started off seemingly around the 18 million mark. And there was talk of release clauses and all of that carry on, and I think he's contracted until 2027. And you guys can correct us when you come onto it if I'm wrong there. But yeah, the price does seem to be drifting up. And I'll start with you on this, Martin. And I've seen some clips of him, and I've read as many kind of scouting reports as much as you can try and believe them and all of that. But Martin, he looks like a huge kind of presence at the back, and you look at him on the ball, and there was some clips of him I saw in a game against Juventus for Bologna last season. He looks like some player.
No, he does, and from what I've seen of him, he looks as if he would add something to what we've got. And look, the club have obviously been tracking him all, for a long time. He's been the number one defensive target, it seems, all throughout the summer. There was a point earlier in the pre-season where we had a release clause, and there was a date where that expired. And I think you're looking at figures being quoted now, and that's kind of approaching what the release clause was. So it's kind of interesting that we've gone back in from. What I'm curious to kind of find out about him, and I listened to the podcast that Gav did with Alex Barker about it yesterday, because he's very much a ball-playing central defender. He plays on the left. He's primarily left-footed, but he can play on the right. And you kind of wonder where he's fit in. And, you're not going to spend that much money on somebody who's not going to come straight into the first team. But Alex Barker was kind of saying, for him, it looks as if he could be a player who comes in when we get more established in the Premier League. And kind of go, well, we don't want to be spending that much money on the central defender to wait until we get a bit better and put him in. So I think it's actually a really interesting one, given that we've got Alderete in, who is now my favourite all-time ever Sunderland player ever by a 100 mile, based off his cameo performance on Saturday. Not that we're going to talk about Saturday. But yeah, look, I think it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that one progresses, because it's almost gone too far for us not to sign him now. It's got that feeling where it's kind of, there's an inevitability about him arriving at the Stadium Light. And you can't see us changing formation, so he's going to be one of two. And who's the other one going to be? You'd think, really, like we've said after the West Ham game, anybody's going to have a challenge getting Ballard's shirt off him. And, Ballard's a completely different type of player to him, it seems, looking at all of the available evidence. So, yeah, look, it's a bit of a puzzle. I was like well up for it until I listened to that pod with Gav and Alex Barker, and I was like, actually, I'm not sure how much sense it really makes right now, but hey, look, there's more intelligent people and more football know-how than I have looking at this transfer. So I'll obviously bow to their superior knowledge, I think.
Yeah, it is an intriguing one, Jonny, because like Martin said, it's rumbled on for a long while, and we've had a couple of, and we'll talk about a couple of them actually, a couple of links that Sunderland have apparently followed up during the summer that we've clearly getting some information on or given a price or whatever that information's been, and we've went, okay, no, we'll leave that and we'll move on to our next one. This one seems to be one of the ones that is stuck, and the club have seemingly just going all out to get him, and it suggests that they're kind of pinning their hopes on saying this is the man we want, this is the one we want to play in our back four this season. Because I mean, you're probably talking a month this has rumbled on now, and with us being linked to him, the price just going up and up and up, and there's a lot of people wanted us to sign him, and now we're getting to that point where it's hitting that 28 million, 30 million mark, where everyone's just going, right, let's just bow out now. They're just clearly kind of pushing us to the limits. Let's move on to another target.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's a very unique situation in terms of this protracted pursuit, because it's not the way that we generally do business under this regime. So you do look at it from that angle and think, look, is it just dragging on too long? As you say, they're kind of, every time we come in with a bid, it's, another couple of million and you'll be there. And then another couple of million, and then all of a sudden it's 35 and you've had your pants pulled down. But I actually draw some parallels to the Granit Xhaka deal, where, that maybe not quite to the same length of time as this, but that did start to drag on a little bit. And, the links first crop up and then they become a little bit more concrete and a little bit more and all the rest of it. And that one as well, the price was, originally it was 10 million we were offering, and then all of a sudden it was 10 to 15, and then the deal gets done for reportedly 20 million euros in the end. Obviously, you take the facts and figures with a pinch of salt when it's unofficial, but by all accounts, that was what was going on. And then actually you then think, well, maybe it's a case of the negotiation strategy for your average signing is keep it under wraps, get it done quickly. It's been the case with so many, hasn't it? This summer and over the previous seasons, where the name is mentioned and then within 48 hours they've signed. Whereas I think actually a little bit of acceptance maybe from the recruitment team and from Kirill, that operating in this market at this level, by necessity, you're going to have to, deal with some of these more publicly kind of playing out transfer situations because of the level of club and player that's involved, and the media interest obviously skyrockets. So I actually kind of agree with Martin in the sense that I think, it's getting to the point where instead of thinking, we'll step away now, I'm thinking, if it's still going on, this probably gets done. And I think for me, look, I didn't know who Jhon Lucumi was before we were linked with him. I don't even know still whether it's Lucumi or Lusumi, I'll be honest. I just kind of pick, and it's 50-50 every time. But from what I have seen and what I have read and what I do know about him, I think he's obviously a good player, obviously a quality footballer who would come in and improve our squad. As to where he'd fit in the team, it's a long old season. I love Alderete as well already after that cameo, and it made me feel very inadequate, because when I played Sunderland, I couldn't knock in 40-yard crosses from centre half and start setting up goals. But he's not going to play every minute. Ballard's not going to play every minute. We know Ballard has injury issues. We've seen it in the Championship. So I think it's a sensible move in terms of bringing in that number of first-team quality options. It's just, you're playing that game of transfer chicken, aren't you, with Bologna around the fee. And obviously we waited for the release clause to expire and all the rest of it. So there's plenty of moving parts, but I think I land on the side of the fence where I do think he's probably going to come. And I think I'd be very excited to see how we can play in games where we're the favourites, in inverted commas, at home, with a more ball-playing defender like that at the back who can, probably help us control games a bit more. Because that's an aspect of Sunderland that we don't see very often. So I would be, I'd be really intrigued to see how we could line up with him in the team.
Oh man, Jonny, you big knacker. I thought I had his pronunciation locked in and sorted, and then you have to go and muddy the waters for us. I wish Gav was here. He'd sort us out with a pronunciation. But but just getting into that back four, Martin, and how we're building that. Jonny touched on it a bit there, but it seemed like with Alderete coming in, you think 28-year-old, really good experience. Ronaldo, 31, Masuaku, 31, tons of experience. Mukele, 27 years old, and I thought he was the signature to almost kind of slot in that right centre-back position, because Alderete, and we saw him stride out, almost like Gary Bennett back in the day, striding out from that back four and, producing the goods and creating something. But Alderete is in that left centre-back spot, and Lucumi is also technically on paper a left-sided centre-half, although there was talk about Alderete being able to play on the right. But just in going back to those ages, 09, 30-year-old as well, and then you've got underneath that, you've got Ballard, 25, Hume, 23. But it does seem to be part of that policy that has gone out and just said, right, okay, in the attacking positions, let's get all those exciting young players in to produce something and bit of confidence in those. But in the back four, 31-year-old, 31-year-old, 28-year-old, 27-year-old, and Luke O'Nien with a 30-year-old, and, Lucumi, 28, seemingly like this is a policy at the back to get tons of experience in there.
Well, it is, and it's a shift, isn't it, from what we've seen previously with our recruitment. But I still think we've I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I still think we've kind of built on what we have done with our recruitment this season, but we just kind of ramped it up to some extent. Now, these signings with Alderete and Lucumi, whoever you want to call them,
it's Johnny's fault.
Have kind of added a little bit of an extra dimension to how we are recruiting. So it's look, there's absolutely no doubt about it. I think Ian Merton made the point, didn't he, when we talked to him the other day about the need for experience at the back, and just that resolute resilience and all that sort of stuff that you want from your defenders, and just that experience, that know-how, and be able to withstand the pressure that we are going to be under for large parts of pretty much every game this season. So to have not only to have a strong first choice defence, but have some backup there that has the equivalent experience and quality more importantly. It just stands us in really good stead. We're not reliant on Dan Ballard staying fit all season. We're not reliant on Trey Hume being able to go and play 38 league games. So there's an awful lot of quality. I think the interesting bit for me is that you've probably got 8, 9 players who would want to be first choice in that back four, if not more. And they will be hoping to be first choice. Now, I think in that early part of the season, when new players come in, they're going to be battling out in training and wanting to prove themselves, all that sort of stuff. When people have been here for 3 or 4 months and they haven't been able to quite force their way in, or somebody like Trey Hume or Dan Ballard's been forced out, how does that kind of impact things? So it's I'm kind of intrigued at how it all plays out, because you've got that, you've got so much competition in that back four now, so much competition. And we'll probably see a couple of players move on before the end of the transfer window, but there's still a whole load of quality there, and it's a great position for us to be in. But I think it's going to be a tricky one to manage in the longer term.
Yeah. Well, just last point on that back four, Jonny, because Martin's just talked about the numbers there. Do you see this as being the last piece in that back four, in that defensive setup, that this would be one last signing? And would you necessarily be disappointed if, in terms of numbers, if we didn't, let's say we didn't sign Lucumi and it was like, right, that's it, then at the defence, we missed out on him, but we haven't got any other targets. We're going to go with what we've got. Would you be happy with that, or would you bank on saying we need one more?
I think definitely last piece of the jigsaw, and I also think it's more of a desire than it is a requirement. I think if we don't get him, then it's going to be disappointing, because obviously we all love to see, quality new players come in and, large transfer fees excite everybody and all the rest of it. But we saw against West Ham, even starting with Sealed, who I don't think would have been on anybody's lips as a first choice centre-back option, at full time at Wembley. Again, not to make this a playoff pod. but he would have been nowhere near the picture for 99% of us, and yet he starts the game. Yes, he wasn't, he wasn't a world beater, and he got turned a couple of times or whatever, but by and large, he held his own. So we know that we have other options in that position that we can rely on. Might be a little strong, but we can certainly turn to when we need them. So whether we do or don't sign this lad, I don't think we're going to be, left high and dry. But I do think it's the kind of signing that can potentially help you kick on that extra level in terms of going from an out and out pure relegation battle to, or maybe you're looking up a little bit at, towards lower mid-table and mid-table and all that sort of thing. You make those signings that just move the needle a little bit in terms of the levels of quality. So, like I say, I do think he'll come, and I hope he does, because I think he'll be a good addition. But I would urge calm from the fan base as a whole. If this doesn't come in, don't be surprised to see them go for nobody, and don't panic, because I think we'll be all right.
No, I think that's right, Johnny. I think what they're looking for with this signing is his ability to pass out of the back four and pass progressively. And I think if you look at even how we played on Saturday, and we know how Lebris likes to set the team up, and we know that we're comfortable out of possession and we want to hit on the counter, right? And that's going to be a trait of ours all season. That's how we're going to play. People like that who can actually spring from the back four, like Luke O'Nien did it to some extent last season with his rake and passes out the wing, and he's really, his ability to kind of step into that sort of midfield area and pass the ball through the lines. And I think that's what, when you read all about Lucumi, I can't even say either bloody pronunciation. I'm going to make me own them now. Jhon.
We were fine.
When you talk about Jhon, we were. When you talk about Jhon, it's that ability to pass and actually make intelligent, progressive passes from the defence that I think they kind of pinpointed. So it's actually not, I'm kind of reading in between the lines with this one. I think it's not as much his defensive ability, although that stands up to scrutiny. It's his ability with the ball at his feet in an attacking sense that they've thought he can actually add an awful lot to what an 11 can achieve. So I think that's kind of where they see him adding to the squad and adding to the team. And I think that's kind of been, because we haven't targeted very similar players like that. Like if you look at Alderete, and perhaps we see something different from what his stats show. I think on Saturday we kind of saw a different player to what you might expect if you just looked at his stats, right? Because he whipped that cross in for my end of the score. He did a bloody Cruyff turn on the edge of the box. He played 1-2. He did a flick over his head. He did everything, right? Brilliant. Favourite player ever. But he seems to be a player who can get on the ball and advance it and pass it around as well. And maybe he was just underutilised in that regard at Getafe. So I think they've kind of targeted players who can kind of do that and spring that, as well as being good defenders. So it's a very long way around to say I actually agree with you that we won't necessarily just, if this one doesn't come off, we won't be rushing to get any centre half in on deadline day, because they actually want a really specific profile of player.
Yeah. Well, let's move away from the old fellas at the back that we're bringing in, and let's go back to some of those from Jhon. Yeah, from reading the headline, Johnny be good when he gets his first goal for Sunderland on his debut. But yeah, let's move back onto them young, exciting attacking players that we're being linked with, and we'll go to you, Johnny, because you're down with the kids on the street and all of that sort of stuff. And we'll go with the latest link in the forward areas, which is Abdul Fatawu. From Leicester City, and again, you can tell me that I've butchered the pronunciation of that if you want, Johnny. I'm sure you will. And this one again, it's another interesting one, because if you read about him, he kind of burst onto the scene in Ghana when he was kind of 15, 16. Everyone was picking up on him, going, he's one of the could be one of the best players moving forward next kind of 5-10 years. And I always remember, and for the life of us, I can't remember. Freddie Adu, that's who I was thinking about back in the day, who everyone thought was going to be absolutely fantastic. And, it seems like this fellow was described as arguably the best African prospect of his generation and all this. And he ended up at Leicester City. And now he's 21-year-old, and he had his opportunity in the Premier League, although he had a bad injury last season, so he didn't played too many games. And I noticed he started both of Leicester's games so far this season, and I think he kind of hit out, I think, at the Leicester fans recently in midweek. So I think it's a bit strange at Leicester City. But it's very odd that, he's one of these players, again, it's talking about potential, because you haven't seen him much in the Premier League yet. I think he played something like 10, 15 games, something like that for Leicester. But we're talking in the region that, again, it seems like the bid is around 27 million, if you believe the reports, around the 30 million mark. And I have said previously that it seems like we go to 10 and then go to 20. That seems to be and then go to 30. We go in tens, seemingly with the bids that we make. So yeah, I mean, he seems exciting, but there's potentially one or two question marks, but it seems a lot. So he must be highly rated still, if they're talking about the 30 million mark for him.
Well, yeah, I mean, it tells you a lot about how he's seen in the sphere of, football recruitment, if those are the figures that are getting bandied around. But I just can't escape a nagging feeling that it's just not quite right, this one. I don't like it. And obviously, you can find all sorts of reasons to justify any opinion on any player in the modern game. There's always a stat or a fact or an injury or whatever that you can point to and either say, well, this is why he's class or this is why he's terrible. But with this one, like you say, I mean, struggled last season, largely due to injury. That's got to be at least a small red flag, in the sense that if a player's struggling with injury in the Premier League and you bring him in for your season in the Premier League, could it be the intensity? Could it be underlying issues? I mean, we've seen even with Romain Mundle, who's already at the club, that once you start getting, with him it was a hamstring injury, once you start picking them up, they can be difficult to shake. Now, I don't know whether Fatawu's got some sort of underlying issue or not. I've got no idea, but that's the kind of thing that makes you a little uneasy. And I don't know, just he's not got much of a track record. Even when they were in the Championship, his numbers aren't spectacular. Now, yes, obviously he's an extremely young player, so he could easily kick on in the next 2 to 3 years. If he comes in, I'll back him 100%, and I'll say that he's going to be absolutely the next best product out of Africa in the history of the game. He'll go up there with the likes of Freddie Adu and Cherno Samba and that on classic Championship managers. But yeah, I think for me, I'd be worried at that price tag why we aren't able to bring in one of the other targets that we've been linked with for a while. I mean, we're going to come on to talk about some of the other ones in a bit more detail, but it could be very unfair from me. It doesn't pass the sniff test. I think I also just don't love signing from relegated teams. And I know that's a really old-fashioned and generalising belief, because you get some amazing players. Andy Robertson signed for Liverpool from a relegated Hull and all the rest of it. But yeah, I would be, with the state of our squad, I would just like to see us, I don't expect us to sign a 27-year-old who's in the absolute prime of his career in the forward areas, because clearly we're not doing that. But I would just like to see something a little more substantial on the CV of whoever it is that comes through the door for the price point that we're reportedly looking at, because that is a lot of money, and we are going to have, obviously, and it's another African player, so the African Cup of Nations becomes an issue yet again. I just think, for me, I'd like to see something either a little bit more of a step up in proven quality, or a little bit more of a potentially higher ceiling. But the caveat to all that is, I could be wrong, because I don't know a great deal about the player beyond what you can glean from listening to Leicester fans and reading the papers.
Yeah, I don't know how much this is lazy reporting, but it was on the BBC, Martin, in this one, and they did term it as Sunderland are exploring it, and I haven't seen any official talk of bids yet. It's all kind of seemingly speculation. But Martin, if you look at who we've got, and I look at it in pairs in terms of Mundle, Talby, Roberts, Adingra, and then beyond that, you could argue, could Rigg play out wide? Could Lafay play out wide? Could Isidore play out wide? Could Mayenda play out wide? And in terms of numbers, does this one make sense to you?
It doesn't. I think what we've got to bear in mind with all of this is that they obviously wanted that Loriente, didn't they? They were really far down the line getting him. And I think in terms of profile, this lad's fairly similar. Having said all of that, he doesn't kind of match up with everything else that we've signed. So we haven't signed from relegated clubs. We've signed pretty much the vast majority of players that we've signed, if not all of them, have come off really good seasons at the current club. So they've actually played a lot of football last year. They've been proving it, the top level in whichever country they've played at. And this lad's had a very injury prone spell. Although, he looked good when he first went into Leicester. But to me, that's a sort of sign that you might go, well, we'll spring 10 million on him, plus a bit of add-ons for stuff, and take a bit of a gamble on him. The prices quoted just don't stack up. It doesn't kind of align with everything else that we've done. He doesn't look like a player who would come in and do something straight away. And look, they might think he's got a really high ceiling. They might look at all of the data that they look at and think, if we can get this lad in, get him fit, he's 21-year-old or whatever he is, in 2 or 3 years' time, he could be worth 80, 90 million. So, there could be that bit too, where they're kind of going, for what they want. And, I know that there's figures getting talked about and all that sort of stuff. I would be absolutely stunned if that was a straight fee. I think there'd be a whole load of stuff built in with performance-related stuff, appearances, goals, us staying up, all sorts of stuff. So you kind of see it to some extent, but I just think at the stage that we're at, and we've had people have done the sums in terms of what they think we've got left to spend in terms of PSR and all that sort of thing. And you kind of the general consensus is that we've got about 25, 30 million left to spend, 40 million perhaps. But we're not going to be going and spend another 100 million between now and the end of the transfer window. I don't think we might do.
Oh,
I don't think
you've just blown all my dreams there, man.
So to spend the vast majority of what we've got left on somebody who is a gamble, I just kind of don't think. It doesn't sit right with me. But the caveat to all of it is they've wanted somebody like that with that profile added to the players that we already have got. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Just to add on in terms of the fee as well, you touched on something that I was trying to articulate but couldn't quite get out, which is for the money and from a relegated club, I think you can find a player as good as him, if not better, on the continent, which is what we've done with every other deal. Like Lorient is a great example. If he was in the Premier League, he's costing you 50, 60 million. Because he's not in the Premier League, he costs you a lot less. With this lad Fatawu, you wonder whether is the price inflated. Yes, I did nearly stumble over that name about 6 times. You wonder, is the price a little bit inflated because it's from an English club who've just had Premier League money? That would be my concern.
Well, let's quickly go into it, Jonny, because you are our Leeds correspondent, and this one could be absolute nonsense purely because Leeds have been linked with him. But the other winger we've been linked with is 22-year-old Jhon Rowe, apparently, and this was from a Leeds source, so they might just be assuming we're after him because Leeds have been linked with him, as has happened all throughout this summer. But he's it's all England under-21 international, but it's all kicked off in Marseille, where he moved after a loan spell, and he'd been at Norwich before then, came through the ranks there. And it's all, he apparently had a fight, and 2 players are being placed on the transfer list there, as far as I'm aware, and he's one of them. And we're looking at, you're talking about fees on the continent, England under-21 international, but potentially the fee is rumoured to be around 17 million there. Does that kind of prove your point?
Well, I think so. Obviously, you've got the extra factor in that one of the disciplinary issues. Now, who's right, who's wrong, what exactly went on, I don't know. I don't work at Marseille, surprisingly. But obviously, that's going to contribute to the price being a little bit knocked down. But even then, that is worlds away from the fee that's getting talked about for Fatawu from Leicester. So you look at that, and that is just a perfect distillation of the way the transfer market's gone, isn't it? The money's washing around the Premier League. So clubs in England who've sort of, fed from that particular trough for any number of seasons, all of a sudden the figures just skyrocket and go way, way up past the point of sense. Whereas this is somebody who obviously has gone to the continent, and then, Ligue 1, there's a lot less money floating around there. So you're welcome, Chris.
What league was it, Jonny?
You You get me going with that, Jonny, honestly.
League
there it is.
But yeah, that's
snip that, Martin, afterwards, and we'll. So if someone out there, if there's someone who can do a remix of songs, clip that and put it into a dance track and send it to us. That would be brilliant.
Stick that behind a paywall. But yeah, that is a perfect example of a deal where you look at it and go, if he was playing in an English club shirt, he'd cost 30 million, but he doesn't, so he's not. I think the big worry for me would just be if he's fighting people and getting put on the transfer list. Is that the kind of character you want to bring in? Having said that, it is Marseille who do seem to be speed running, building the team full of the biggest amount of dickheads possible. So maybe he was in the right and we should be welcoming him back to England as a hero. But, to be seen, I suppose.
I think the thing with the transfer fee that's been quoted for Rowe, because he was on loan at Marseille last year and his move only got made permanent for 50 million euros at the end of the season. So everyone knows that's what they've just paid for him. So, if they whack the fee up to 30 million euros, people go, nah, can't have that. So if they want to move him on, the fee is potentially going to be a bit lower, isn't it? I wouldn't be that bothered with him having a fight and train. I think he's shows a bit of character, doesn't it? Depends
like
what he hits.
We'll like a bit of that. But it does kind of point towards us looking for that one. Martin, you mentioned Loriente. We're talking about two more potential targets there. And of course, just quickly, because you can throw in, Adley as well, who is now apparently off to Bournemouth. We're expecting that to be complete in the next couple of days. Are you bothered that one didn't come through, that we didn't pursue that a bit more from Bayer Leverkusen?
No, look, I'm really happy with where the squad's at. And I still think we've got people like, Romain Mundel who can come in and be a good Premier League player. I think he's got tons of ability. You've got Lefebvre, who I just think we've got to find some way of getting him into the side somewhere. And if Talbi or Odinga is not able to start a game, I'd be bringing Enzo in, and I'd want him to have a game. So I think it's a fine balance, isn't it? Obviously the manager's got to balance that squad, but if you've got too many good players, as I touched upon earlier, it's kind of going to get tricky to manage. The big one, which I am retaining a 1% hope of, Ahmad, because seriously,
you've gone and done it now.
But if you look at him, he was on the bench for Man United on Saturday, wasn't he? They don't play the system for him. They chucked him out a bloody wing back. And if we want a right winger who can come in on his left foot, I tell you, you talk about 30 million from the lads from Leicester. I'd rather use that to buy Ahmad's left leg. I just think there's a deal to be done there.
Here's one for you. We miss out on Lucumi. We take that 30 million euros we were going to spend on him, add it to the winger budget. All of a sudden, Ahmad's looking pretty affordable, isn't he?
Yeah, stick Ahmad at centre half.
Wait, we almost did in that playoff game against Luton, if you remember. Yeah. We could have Gooch playing there.
He's only one injury off playing there in the playoffs, wasn't he?
Yeah, but yeah, I think Amran might be lynched if they lose their next game and sell Ahmad, but we'll see what happens. And I think you've raised everyone's hopes there, Martin. So well done for that. But we'll go into players leaving because I think there was reports that Hemeya might be actually leaving on a permanent to go back to Portugal with Estrela da Amadora. And I read that out kind of syllable by syllable just to make sure I got that right. And that was some sources in Portugal, I think, were reporting that. So he might be off. But just in terms of players leaving, we're talking about this. And Jonny, I'm interested to hear you on this because we're talking. There's a long list of players who might leave either on loan or permanent. But Jonny, we were talking about this with Ian Murder, and I'm really interested, and I'm genuinely kind of not, because your last promotion would have been when you were quite fairly young, when Roy Keane took us up. And me and Martin were talking about promotions gone past where you emotionally invest in some of these players who get you up, and you love these players. I said on the Ian Murder pod that I remember Richard Ord and Martin Scott and Kevin Ball, and I wanted to see all these players play in the Premier League. I wanted to see Kevin Ball smash into Eric Cantona and, well, if he could catch him, and all that. So, I wanted to see these players play in the Premier League. And you're I suppose, going through that with it being so long since we were last promoted to the Premier League. What's your feelings on all these players just suddenly coming down the pecking order that you've emotionally invested in so much for that big promotion?
Yeah, no, it is. It's a strange feeling. Like you say, that last promotion that I have any memory of really is obviously the Roy Keane one. And that one, obviously we went quite mad in the transfer market that summer as well. And we did bring a lot of players in, but one of the more important deals we made was bringing Jonny Evans back in the January. So there's a player you've brought in who was in that team. So that's the best of both worlds. It's a signing, but you love him already, and he's class. So we had some lovely stuff like that. But I still love Nyron Nosworthy to this day because he's just absolutely mental, and he was in that team. But over time, he got phased out because obviously we signed players who were of a higher quality, and you do have that bittersweet feeling where. I think it was different with that Keane one because I think a lot of the players who I had any emotional connection with did at least get some games in the Premier League, and they were playing and they were involved, even if they weren't first choice. But this team, actually, now you look at it and you think, Dan Neil, where do you fit in? Chris Rigg, where do you fit in? Job's obviously gone. Even someone like Dennis Serkin, who I think the first half of last season, especially, we were all waxing lyrical about him and calling him the best fullback in the division. And I think he was for the first half of last season. He was amazing. And he's come up from League One, and I'm looking at him, I'm thinking, I would just love to see Dennis Serkin be our starting left back. Like from that emotional point of view, I'd love to see it. But now you look at the team and you go, we'd have to lose 2 or 3 before he gets a go in the team now. And that's the case right across the pitch, which is why I was so chuffed to see the 3 goal scorers at the weekend be players who were here last season, because I think it is really important to maintain some of that continuity. But we've got to accept, and I think all of us as fans, we would say that we're disappointed, but not upset to see players getting replaced, because it means that we've brought better players in. And obviously, Lewis Hemir, the sweet prince, gone but never forgotten if he does leave. He may not be the top of that list for most people, but he's one of many who are more than likely either going to leave or would be allowed to leave if the right deal comes in between now and the end of the window. And some of those names are going to be players who a lot of us do have an emotional connection with. Even somebody like Jensen Seelt, who I think, dependent on whether we do bring another body in, is more than likely going to get a loan deal, isn't he, if all those players come in, because there just won't be room for him. I like Seelt. I think he seems like a good character, and I think he's done all right when he's played, but there's just no room for it, is there? And it is a bit of a strange one to try and get your head round, because it's difficult to comprehend how, what's happened to the squad over the past couple of months anyway. But it's also strange to really like a Sunderland team that we've had last season, because that's not been a feeling that we've always been accustomed to over the past 15, 20 years. So, yeah, trying to get used to replacing players with quality and being sad about the players we lose. I'm expending quite a lot of brain power on that alone, to be honest.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Martin, Jonny went through a lot of names there. We've got, I'm just to go through them, trying to look at the squad there. Niall Huggins, Seelt, likely to go out on loan. We've got Elise, Hjelde, Brown potentially, Paveda, Triantis. You look through the squad and Serkin, still going on about Dan Neil. You can go right through the squad and say, do these players want to fight it out? Are they happy getting 10 games this season, or are we going to find them a move away?
Yeah, you've almost got 2 sort of pools of players, haven't you? You've got the likes of Hemir, we've talked about already. Pembele is still on the books. Abdullah Bar is still on the books. I think Rooson's still kicking about somewhere. Paveda, Joe Anderson. You've got all of these group of players who didn't really kick a ball last season for us. So you've got that kind of group, which obviously we need to move on, and probably permanently, because you can't see any of those having a future with us if the future kind of pans out the way that we want it to. And even regardless, you can't see any of them playing first team football, certainly first team league football for us again. And then you've got kind of another sort of ranch of players where, you kind of wonder if circumstances as well as choices kind of led to this. We know that Dennis Cirkin and Dan Neil have got 1 year left in the contract, and the club have been trying to get them to sign new contracts. Now, if those two had signed new contracts earlier in the piece, do we still do the same transfer activity as we've done already? You've got Luke O'Neill now injured, and I think Luke O'Neill will be around to sign a new contract, hasn't he? But, does that sort of injury bit play a part as well? So you've got a sort of a two-pronged thing going on with the amount of signings that the club have kind of almost felt they've had to make for us to have a squad that would compete. I think, while all of us would love Chris Rigg to come in and absolutely rip it up at the Premier League, we all, hand on heart, know that it would be a tough ask for him to play a significant number of games for us in the Premier League this season. Dan Neil can come in and certainly do a job, you would think, and I would hope that, I think you'd hope with Dan Neil and with Rigg and other people like that training with a higher quality of teammate over the next few months will elevate their game as well. So they're coming in and they're sharpening up, and they'll be watching Premier League football and spotting what they can do and all that sort of stuff. So, there's that bit of development for them as well. And in some respects, it might be the club kind of being fair to them, because, while we all would have loved to have seen that team at Wembley come up, play in the Premier League and rip it up, we all know that wouldn't have happened. It would have been a really incredibly tough ask for them to do it. It just would have been impossible. And I think it would actually been cruel and harsh to ask them to do it. So, the reality is the Premier League and Championship has had a gap that's widened significantly since the last time that we went up. You aren't going to get a team who comes up and you keep 9 or 10 starters out of that team and they come and compete in the Premier League week after week, because the gap's far too wide. So you bridge that gap in any way you can. I think the way that we've done it hopefully still gives the players that got us up, or a lot of them anyway, the chance to actually to play football, but the pressure's not completely on them to keep us up. Mundle's injured. I mentioned Mundle before. I do think Mundle's potentially a Premier League player. And, if he hadn't been injured, do we make the same signings in the wing positions as we have? So I think there has been circumstances as well that have dictated our transfer activity. But again, if you look at how many players we actually have on our books, you're kind of verging towards Chelsea levels of footballers at the minute. So we're going to need to move some on. And it's kind of an interesting thing with that as well, because, for the last few seasons, we've been in the position where we're waiting towards this bit of the transfer window for players to become available to then go and get. And we're not in that position anymore. We're waiting with our, reserve players, peripheral players, to move them on, depending on who we bring in. Still, I think the club really fancy Sills, and I think they've been really impressed with him in pre-season, and he's kind of played his way into their thinking. All the stories were that he was going to go back to Holland on loan for a season. I think I would love our players like that to go out in the Championship on loan. Because I think if they want a pathway into our first team, they've got to go and play in the Championship. I just don't think there's any value in them going back to play in the home country for a season. But that's another point altogether. But I think we're going to see an awful lot of movement over the next sort of 10 days, 2 weeks. You've got people like Triantis, who we haven't really mentioned. All these people who we thought, it's funny if you think about Triantis, at the end of the season, we were kind of thinking, oh, could he come back and play his way into the team? And it's there's absolutely no cat and hell's chance now.
Yeah, well, I think we should.
There were shouts of Triantis playing in the 6, and we've got Granit Xhaka there.
Well, that's exactly right. So.
Slight difference.
Well, we should just send everyone to Hibs for a season, because they come back twice the value, basically, don't they, when we send them to Hibs?
Apart from my ender.
Well, yeah, but then you had to come back and
50-50 strike rate.
That's it.
Yeah, Duncan Watmore had a great time there back in the day.
Right. I mean, just very quickly on that young player point, Jonny, because Ogunsui scored a hat-trick against Spurs for the under-21s, or the development team, or the under-18s, or whatever it's called now. I never remember what it is. But and he's really highly rated, and he got into a lot of matchday squads last season. And you look at maybe loan moves for him. If you look at Matty Young, look flying again at Salford, and Salford is saying he's going to be so important for them this season. And I made the point to Gav a couple of weeks ago, Martin touched on it there, about Chris Rigg as well. And there's going to be this debate maybe where what is the best for Chris Rigg? What is it best for him to stay with us, get some minutes, be around the Premier League, be around the bench, be around this squad, be around these players? Or is it the best move for his progression if he plays 46 games in the Championship, let's say, this season? I mean, but there's players like Ogunsui who you would think he would get the loan move away. So what young players would you like to get a year's experience, and which young players would you like to stay with us and, maybe get a few match day squads?
Rigg, I certainly think, should stay. I think he is obviously already completely integrated into the first team environment here. He played 40-odd games last season. He was in the squad against West Ham. He came off the bench. So, he's already made his Premier League debut, which is really insane for a kid as young as him to have that much football behind him and be a Premier League player already. I think we kind of forget almost how mad it is, his rise at such a young age, because we've all become a bit accustomed to it now because he's been in and around the team for a couple of seasons. But I think he's going to be better off training and playing alongside Xhaka and Diarra and Siddiqui and Lafay and all the rest of the players that we've brought in, and learning from them and seeing how they approach things and seeing what do they do differently that, I don't know, not to dig anybody out, but an Alan Brown doesn't do in training every day. What's the difference? What separates the elite players from the rest? I think he'll be much better off being here and being around that. And he'll still get some football. It's not like he's staying here to just, get spelks in his arse for 9 months and then have a summer off. But Ogunsui, I think, would be the other side of that coin, where he's not integrated into the first team environment. I think he's only played against Stoke in the Cup last season, from the top of my head. So he, I think, would actually benefit just from being in a first team. He needs to go somewhere and be playing senior football, training with the first team, and, taking all the knocks and bumps and bruises that come with that, and getting used to that and learning that way of being every day. Because obviously it's different levels of intensity and everything, isn't it, when you step up from age group football to senior stuff. And obviously the jump in quality as well. So yeah, I think for me, the poster boy for staying is Rigg, and the poster boy for going is Ogunsui. And anybody else in the 21s who is viewed as having a future here in any form, I think they need to be looking at getting them out on loan ASAP, because you just look back at the best players that we've produced and the players who've gone on to have successful careers. They've all had loan moves at varying levels, but always kind of progressing. Pickford did it. Henderson did it. Even Jack Colback, as much as it didn't end particularly nicely, he was, I think it was Ipswich or somebody he was out on loan at, and then, came back, and then you can make your mark in the first team. So I think essentially the cut-off is, if you're already in the first team, then you can stay there. And if you're not, I think you need to go and you need to learn your trade. So there'll be a handful of names in that, under 21s or under 18s. I mean, we were just briefly talking about Dan Cameron before we came on, who's been mooted to have a month loan move out to, was it Hebburn Town, I think?
Yeah.
Maybe not the best level, but any experience of senior football is better than none in my book. So yeah, I'm looking at those young lads. I want them out.
Yeah. And just to quickly round that point off, Martin, because you can throw Harrison Jones into there, who's had a good pre-season and is clearly highly rated. Would you prefer to see them in and around and sticking with the club, or going out and getting some games?
It's it depends to some extent, doesn't it, on what transfer activity happens over the next few weeks? Because you look at somebody like Patrick Roberts. If a bid came in for him and we got another winger in, does the club accept it? If it does, and Patrick Roberts moves on, then you go, well, you keep people like Chris Rigg around, because he can come out on the right if need be. He can come centrally, and between now and Christmas, he could be useful. If Roberts is still here at the end of the transfer window, and we've signed another player who can play in that right-hand side of attack, when Ahmad comes and Patrick Roberts stays, but like, in all seriousness, if if we do make a signing like that in terms of player profile, somebody can go out on the right and somebody can play a bit more centrally in the centre of midfield. Like, realistically, how far is Rigg down the pecking order right now? And how much use in his development is 5 minutes here and there coming off the bench going to have for him? I think the challenging thing is to get a loan move for him to a club that would play him in the right position for the amount of football that we'd want him to have at the standard that we want him to have it at. And I think that would be the challenging thing for him, because I don't think there's many clubs in the Championship, at least, who would have given Chris Rigg the football that we gave him last season. So, there's one thing kind of going, ideally you'd get him out playing football. The making that happen is often more difficult than saying it. But Johnny's spot on in terms of getting players out on loan. And I would say, like, anybody who we think is a potential first team player who is 17 or over, we should be getting out to League One, Championship, League Two, whatever level we can get them at, and get them 30 games a season of pro football. Because for them plodding along playing under 21s, under 23s, under 18s, whatever it might be, I just don't think it's set up to actually develop players well enough. I just don't think it gets you the experience that you actually need. So look, I think there's a few fall in that book, like Harrison Jones, for example. I'd love to see him go out on loan and play 30 games somewhere and actually see what he is all about, see what he has actually got. We've seen little flashes of stuff, but the club seem to really rate him quite highly. But I think, again, the stage that we're at, we need these players to be coming into our squad. And, bear in mind, you've got 9 subs and stuff like that. But really, you need those players to be able to come and play at Premier League level. They're not going to come back and try to step in the Championship for 20 minutes anymore. If we can stay in the Premier League, which, fingers crossed we will, you want these players to be at that level to come and step up. So I think some of those players will have to go out on loan, see if they can find their level and see what they've actually got, because the only way that they can prove it is to go out and play what I would call proper football. And, for some of them, I think we've seen it before, haven't we, where we've sent players out on loan where we could have actually done with them on the bench, but you kind of go, you know what, they need the experience. And I think the club are quite pragmatic in that regard. They'll go, this is best for that player. We'll put him out on loan and get him some football. I can't remember, there was who was it? It was the last season or the season before they sent somebody out on loan. And we were all going, we should have kept him around the squad because he could have been pretty useful. But the club had said, no, for his development, he needs to go out on loan. It'll come to us in a second. But I think there'll be 2 or 3 like that where we're kind of going, he might have been useful in a game here and there, but they'll actually send them out on loan.
The only player I can think of was Anderson, and surely it's not him. But
no, it wasn't.
Adil Oshish went in January, didn't he, last season, when he'd actually been getting a run in the team?
That's maybe the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. But there was even parts of last season after he'd gone, I was going, what we could have done with him. I actually like him as a player. I think he's got a lot of potential. Yeah.
And another one, Timothy Pembele as well, was another one where, quality-wise you can argue, but we probably could have done with another body of fullback at times last season, couldn't we?
Yeah.
But they went, no, he's out on loan, that's where he needs to be.
Yeah. Well, I think we should probably leave it there, gents, because once again, a quick half-an-hour news roundup has turned into an hour, and I do admit that is entirely my fault. So we should leave it there. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Martin. Always a pleasure, mate.
Cheers, mate. Always good.
And thank you very much, Johnny. We'll stick your OnlyFans account, your audio that you're putting out. Put the details for that with the pod, eh?
Yep, the listeners are in for a couple of treats.
Good stuff. Look forward to that. But yes, thanks again for everyone for listening to our quick 20-minute, half-an-hour news roundup, which it always is. Very briefly going through all of the news related to Sunderland AFC. And we will, of course, pivot to the preview of the weekend's game, and we'll have all that covered on either the Roker Report website or, of course, our daily releases on How We're the Podcast. But from us, bye for now.
podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.